Hello, good morning. The big question is, who is number 2 in California under this jungle primary, as they call it? So Gavin Newsom, the Republicans were worried that they were not going to have any candidates at the top of the ticket to cross the state and that they wouldn't have as many voters come November. But Gavin Newsom, the Democrat, former mayor of San Francisco, will face a Republican for governor. That is very good news for Republicans out here in California. They may also have a Republican in the Senate race. Dianne Feinstein, she easily went through as the Democrat, but it's unclear whether she will face Kevin De Leon on her left or Jim Bradley on the right, but those votes are still being counted. Democrats also had great expectations about picking up seats in California. The National Democrats targeting 10 seats. 7 of those seats are districts that Hillary Clinton won, where Republicans now serve. Those ones were very intense, where you had tons of Democrats go into those races. So they split up the vote so much that it wasn't clear that Democrats were going to get through in all those races. They might have 1, 2, perhaps as many as 3 races where it was only Republicans that would advance to November, despite this great Democratic interest and support out there. But it looks like Democrats will get through. In California 10, there are 2 that are close still. California 10, there's a Democrat and a Republican in the number 2 spot that are still, they're still counting votes on that. And in California 48, Dana Rohrabacher's seat, he will advance to the general, but there is a 3-way fight between 2 Democrats and a Republican in that one, and we'll see where that one goes. All of this against the backdrop of how long it's going to take to get those votes counted. California, nothing is easy in California. You can mail in your mail-in ballot on election day. It just has to get there in 3 days. A lot of people dropped their mail-in ballots off. There were also 118,000 people in L.A. County who were not on the rolls at all, so they had to fill out paper ballots. All of that means it's going to take time to count all those final votes and figure out who's who. Who's number 2 in California? Back to you guys.
Who is number 2 indeed? Miguel Marquez, thank you so much.
I think Miguel was up all night covering this for us, so thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Let's bring in CNN Politics senior writer Harry Enten and our senior political analyst Mark Preston. Gentlemen, to you, and Mark, let me begin with you. Not a blowout for Dems, certainly a sigh of relief this morning. Not a blue wave either, though, right?
Yeah, not a blue wave either, and I think there are 2 major, perhaps 50,000-foot looks at this election last night. One is, can the Democratic Party now come together? The great untold story, because Donald Trump seems to suck up every bit of oxygen in the room, is that the Democratic Party is very much in disarray. You have progressives very much pushing against the middle, the more centrist part of the party, and certainly the establishment. So as we're heading into November, can we see the Democratic Party come together? The second thing is that Donald Trump still has a great influence in these elections. Down in Alabama, for instance, last night we saw that Martha Roby, who is a Republican who was very critical of Donald Trump after the release of the Hollywood Access tape, Republican who should easily sail to re-election and shouldn't have a primary challenge, in fact, is now going to go into a runoff against a former Democrat, a gentleman by the name of Bobby Bright, a former Democratic congressman. So Donald Trump certainly has a role and an influence in these elections, and in the case of Alabama, it was negative for the incumbent.
Yeah, and in the California governor's race, Harry, when you're looking at John Cox, the Republican candidate there endorsed by Donald Trump, what's your takeaway there?
Well, my takeaway is that John Cox was basically an unknown candidate. Antonio Villagrosa looked like he was going to go into second place, and in the late polls you saw Cox sort of spike up, and a large part of the reason I would argue that he spiked up was because of Donald Trump's endorsement. In fact, the Cox campaign apparently didn't even know it was coming, and as soon as it did come, Cox jumped right up into second place and is going to be there in November.
So what's the takeaway as other Republicans are looking at that?
I think the takeaway there, and you connect it to Alabama too, is that if you're a Republican, you do not want to be on the bad side of Donald Trump. Republican voters really love Donald Trump. He right now has an approval rating in the high 80s, so even if he's not too popular in the middle, these Republican candidates need to be careful. Yes, they want to reach out to independents and not be too close to Trump, but at the same time, they don't want to get too far away from him because then you lose your base.
Mark, if Democrats flip the 7 California districts won by Hillary Clinton, but currently in Republican hands, they're going to be almost a third of the way to that magic number for them, which is 23 seats if they want to retake the House. Doable?
Oh, no question. And I'm probably more bullish on this than I think most analysts are. I know that the generic polling is shifting back
Right.
towards the Republican side. But it's absolutely doable, because what we're seeing in what Harry's just pointing out in California with the enthusiasm of the Trump voters, we're also seeing that on the Democratic side, which ties back to the fact, can the Democratic Party, can the more establishment types and the progressive types, can they come together? Can they meet at the table to try to win in November? Perhaps they may not need to, based on historical analysis, that Democrats are likely to take back the House, but certainly I know party leaders are hoping they can come together.
You as bullish, Harry?
I don't know if I'm quite as bullish, but I would certainly agree with Mark that Democrats are favored in the House in November. I mean, just historically speaking, you see usually waves or mini waves in midterm elections, and with the president still having an approval rating, even if it's up, it's still in the low 40s. That translates historically into a big gain for the out party.
I do think that's an important point. I mean, yes, he has low 40s approval, and a 4 looks better than a 3, as John Berman said this morning, for any president in the front of that number in polling. But, you know, it's still, it's high, I guess, on the Trump curve, if you will, Harry.
Yeah, it's high on the Trump curve, but historically speaking, the presidents who I'd most associate with this approval rating at this point in the presidency are presidents like Jimmy Carter, presidents, you know, Ronald Reagan, right, going up into the midterm elections, even Barack Obama in his second term, and most of those presidents saw their parties do quite poorly in the midterm election. So for me, looking at a low 40s, that may be good for Trump, but it's really not good for the Republican Party.
Mark, if you're one of these Democrats in the Senate trying to hold on to your seat going into the midterm elections, and you're looking at what you saw last night, desperately trying to read some tea leaves here, you know, what are you thinking?
Well, a couple of things. So let's just look at a couple of them, such as Jon Tester or Joe Manchin. You walk a very fine line. So for Joe Manchin, for instance, in West Virginia, you know, it's a Republican state. I mean, I don't think the voter rolls necessarily show that, or voter registration, but it is a Republican state and a reliably Republican state. Joe Manchin, very successful governor, is basically running on his service to the state while not trying to upset the Trump voters. When you go out and you see what's happening with Jon Tester, he's walking a very fine line, but he's being a little bit more careful not to alienate his progressive voters. So each race is entirely different, and I know that's cliche to say, but each race is entirely different in how they reach out to the middle and not to alienate certainly those Trump voters or excite them to vote against them.
Harry, the story of women. We talked about this going in to the primary, and it played out last night.
It absolutely played out. Look at the governor's races: Alabama, South Dakota, New Mexico, Iowa. Women candidates for the major parties that are favored in the fall won in all 4 of those states. Look at the congressional races. Deb Haaland in New Mexico, first district on the Democratic side. She looks like she's going to be the first Native American woman ever elected to the Congress. And I'll point out one more. In Iowa's 3rd district, Signe Axne was down in the polls by a point. She ends up winning by 30 percentage points. That, to me, is an illustration that women candidates are doing very, very well, especially on the Democratic side this year.
All right. Thank you both, Harry Enten, Mark Preston. We appreciate it.
A leading Republican is now saying that Scott Pruitt is, quote, as swampy as you get. The controversies mounting against the EPA chief. And the latest involves Chick-fil-A? No, we are not kidding.
It's true. Plus, a White House contractor wanted for attempted murder gets arrested by the Secret Service just steps away from the White House. We have the latest on that. And then there's this.
Here's what I want to say. It wasn't my finest hour.
President Bill Clinton.
This morning, the controversies keep coming for EPA Chief Scott Pruitt. Emails show that Pruitt had one of his aides reach out to Chick-fil-A. Yeah, I'm serious, about a possible business opportunity for his wife. It's just the latest in a list of his actions, including first-class travel, costly security expenses, connections to lobbyists that are raising more than just a few eyebrows. CNN's Caitlin Collins is live for us at the White House. And, you know, listen to this. Tell us about this. Senator Joni Ernst. This is a Republican who says that this is as swampy as it gets. Caitlin?
Yeah, that's right, Brianna. The problems are growing for Scott Pruitt. Another ethics scandal on his plate, this time in the form of fried chicken. Scott Pruitt reportedly tried to enlist an aide at the EPA to help him with a personal task, the task of securing a potential business opportunity for his wife, who he wanted to become a Chick-fil-A franchisee owner. The aide reached out to Chick-fil-A, to the CEO of Chick-fil-A, to set up a call between Pruitt and them. She said that it was a personal request on behalf of Mr. Pruitt. This is becoming just something else added to the list. That opportunity never actually materialized, but it's one more thing that we're seeing Scott Pruitt do here, as he's under 12 federal investigations right now for a list of ethics problems, including his travel expenses, flying first class on taxpayer dollar, his living situation, his coziness with lobbyists, his blatant disregard for the taxpayer dollar. And we are just seeing these problems continue to add up to where it has become a running joke that he has another ethics scandal added to his list. The White House has been asked about this time and time again, specifically the Chick-fil-A thing. Sarah Sanders said she hadn't discussed it with Trump, but they were certainly concerned. But it's even lawmakers that are now piling on to the president to do something about Scott Pruitt here. Joni Ernst, a Republican, issued a blistering statement about Scott Pruitt and what he had to say, going after him for all of these issues and saying that he's about as swampy as you can get. And it really just goes to show that this is one of the president's most powerful cabinet members. You see there the quote, Joni Ernst saying, if the president wants to drain the swamp, he needs to take a look at his own cabinet. That is a promise the president made when he came to Washington, and there does seem to be a deal of irony now that one of his main cabinet members has this list of ethic problems.
Yeah, and we're also learning, Caitlin, about the White House aide, Kelly Sadler, who joked about Senator John McCain's health. She's no longer working at the White House, but is it possible that she could still be working in the Trump administration?
It is, Brianna, and the administration has made that quite clear. Kellyanne Conway just confirmed what CNN reported yesterday, that for the last 2 weeks or so, the White House has been strategizing a way for Kelly Sadler to leave the executive office. That would be right here at the White House in the executive office building next door where other staffers work, where Sadler worked. But she could still stay on in the administration, maybe in another agency or a department. And Kellyanne made that quite clear in her interview just there with John Berman. Listen to what she had to say.
To be clear, you're not closing the door. You're not closing the door to an administration job because of what she said about John McCain. Pure and simple, correct?
Kelly Sadler has been told that there are administration jobs that fit with her skill set and her experience, and that the rest is really her choice of what she would like to do next.
So what we are seeing here, Brianna, is the White House not pushing Kelly Sadler out because she made that crass remark about Senator John McCain's opinion not mattering because he was dying anyway. But the main problem was that she outed one of the communications director telling President Trump that Mercedes Schlapp was leaking information about the administration. That is what led us to this point here. And what we are witnessing is the White House letting Kelly Sadler leave the administration quietly without ever having condemned the remarks she made about John McCain.
And she promised Meghan McCain that she would do so publicly, we should point out as well. Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Really appreciate the report.
All right, so joining us now is Democratic Congressman Gerry Connolly of Virginia. He sits on the Oversight and Foreign Affairs Committee. Nice to have you here, sir. And let's begin with Pruitt. Good morning. The reporting we just heard on the latest scandal surrounding Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator. You've been incredibly outspoken on this. You sit on House Oversight, and your committee will hear from two key members of Pruitt's team later this month as they come forth for testimony, both his chief of staff and his former policy advisor. You know, we're hearing Republicans now more vocal on this, like Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, who said this is as swampy as it gets, and she went as far as to say it's time for the president to let him go. It's time for the president to get rid of Scott Pruitt. Do you see the tide turning here among Republicans, fed up, saying it's enough?
I sure hope so. I do think there is pressure building on the Republican side because Pruitt, who may have been seen as an asset because of his policy views, now clearly is going to be an albatross going into the midterm elections for Republicans all across the country, and certainly doesn't help President Trump.
But you think Pruitt is going to hurt Republicans running in the midterms?
I do, because I think he becomes the image of the swamp creature. It's exactly the opposite of what Trump promised in the campaign. You know, this guy's you know, an original. He puts to shame many other swamp creatures that were here when Trump got elected.
He's executing the president's agenda, and obviously you know that there have been those who've said, look, it's going to be too hard for us to get someone else confirmed through Congress if you do choose to replace him. Let me move on to the primaries, what we saw
But can I
overnight.
just say, can I just say about that, though, that doesn't excuse his ethical behavior.
Yeah, I'm putting it out there as
account.
one of the facts of why the president may be keeping him, right?
Right.
So the primaries overnight, California in particular, yes, Democrats can breathe a sigh of relief this morning, and Republicans certainly can in the governor's race there, but this was not a blue wave. Do you think that your party is still trying to really get its footing heading into the midterms?
No, I think actually it was a pretty good night last night. We did what we had to do in New Jersey, in Iowa, in California to set ourselves up for some serious electoral victories.
But is that enough? Is that enough to retake the House, just doing what we had to do, right?
I believe it sets the stage for being more than enough. I believe a wave is building. I think we see that all across the country. We won a special election last night that didn't get a lot of attention in a red district near Kansas City. And that just caps a series of wins in unlikely places where Democrats are prevailing. So I think it was a good night for us last night. Is there an absolute guarantee we're going to win in November? Of course not.
There is no
we still have
guarantee,
to do
as
the
we
hard work.
learned.
That's right.
There is no guarantee, as we've learned. Look, you have been very critical of this president. You tweeted recently, in your words, that he's, quote, spiraling out of control in regards to the Russia investigation and his attacks on it. But as you know, it's Congress that has the check on that, right? And that's the power of impeachment. However, you warn against that and say impeachment should be a last resort remedy. Do you think that your fellow Democrats should be wary heading into the midterms of running too much on impeachment?
Absolutely. I believe that voting for a Democrat should not be seen as tantamount to a vote for impeachment. In fact, if it is, then I think we're going to lose elections we otherwise might win. Even Trump voters agree in many cases that this president needs adult supervision, and that means Democrats. And they're willing to vote for Democrats, or at least entertain voting for Democrats, so long as we separate ourselves from the I word.
In terms of jobs, overnight we learned that U.S. Steel will reopen one of their plants in Granite City, Illinois. They're going to hire 300 more workers, and they specifically cite the president's tariffs, Section 232, for these jobs. Does the president get credit?
Well, he may get credit in that one instance, but the retaliatory measures taken by allies and trading partners are so massive that they're going to put out of work a lot of Americans, and they're going to hurt huge sections of the economy like agriculture. So there are winners like that one plant, but there are also going to be an awful lot of losers, especially throughout the Midwest.
We do know that about 80 times as many jobs in this country are because of imported steel and supplies that use steel than jobs creating steel in this country, which is to your point. Right. On trade, Republican Senator Bob Corker is going to propose a bill today that would tie the president's hands somewhat on trade, that it would have to go through tariffs like this, would have to go through congressional authority. Now, McConnell said, I'm not going to bring a freestanding bill like that to the floor, but it can be tied to this defense measure. Do you support that legislation?
I have to take a look at the details, but I am in general supportive of that kind of legislation. I don't think any president ought to be able unilaterally to disrupt the trading patterns all across the globe because of his personal private views. And so I think there should be a legal process that involves both branches of government.
Yesterday, finally on immigration, Attorney General Jeff Sessions went on Hugh Hewitt's radio show, and he was asked about the administration's policy that separates children from their parents coming across the border illegally. If their parents are, to be put in the justice system, prosecuted, that separates the children most of the time. Here's his defense.
The law requires us to keep children in a different facility than we do for adults. And every time somebody, Hugh, gets prosecuted in America for a crime, American citizens, and they go to jail, they're separated from their children. And we don't want to do this at all. If people don't want to be separated from their children, they should not bring them with them.
You say this practice is cruel. You're proposing legislation to prevent it. Do you have any Republican support on that?
Not yet. It's very hard to get Republican support on anything with respect to immigration. As you know, we've got
Well, that's
21.
not true. Look at the discharge. No.
No,
Look at the discharge position, right? I mean, on DACA, they're trying to force a vote.
Well, before you said that, I was just going to say, with the exception of 21 brave Republicans have signed the discharge petition. So trying to get other aspects of immigration addressed legislatively with Republican support and help has been very difficult. But I do think this is an inhumane policy. No American can be proud of this. You're breaking up families, you're scaring children, you're doing terrible pain to parents and grandparents. There's a better way of doing this, and certainly separating kids and incarcerating them separately, I don't think, is at all reflective of American values.
Congressman Gerry Connolly, I appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, so ahead for us, fashion designer Kate Spade's autopsy report could be released today as the fashion world and fans pay tribute.
Fashion designer Kate Spade's autopsy report could be released today. This after police said that she hung herself in an apparent suicide inside of her Manhattan apartment. A suicide note was found there in her apartment, and according to authorities, she addressed her daughter and her husband in that note. CNN correspondent Bryn Gingras is in New York. She has more details. What can you tell us, Bryn?
Yeah, Brianna, so we may get that autopsy report later today, and that will give us the manner and cause of death. It's very likely that investigators will also send out for toxicology reports, which will take much longer to get. As far as the investigation goes, there's not too much more that detectives can do. Certainly, they will be talking to family members, trying to understand the circumstances that surrounded this tragic death. As you noted, there was a suicide note that was left behind, and in it, her words were addressed to her daughter, who's 13 years old, and her husband of 24 years. And investigators will really try to get an idea of why this happened. However, we may never actually know that answer. What we know, though, is that she was a fashion icon, and everyone has been talking about the impact she has made on their lives. You know, this is an empire she started in 1993 in her New York City apartment with just 6 signature handbags, and then it just grew and grew and grew. She recently sold her latest shares in 2006 of the company. We're told to spend more time with her daughter, who she leaves behind, dying at 55 years old. I want to point out some of the responses that we've seen through Twitter, other social media. Chelsea Clinton is a notable one because it says this: "My grandmother gave me my first Kate Spade bag when I was in college. I still have it. Holding Kate's family, friends, and loved ones in my heart." And that's something we've heard sort of reiterated over and over again, that everyone remembers when they got their first Kate Spade bag. But this is also important to note, is how Kate Spade said she wanted to be remembered. She spoke to Glamour magazine back in 2002, and she said this, quote, "I hope that people remember me not just as a good businesswoman, but as a great friend and a heck of a lot of fun." So that's a really sweet way that she hopes to be remembered. A lot of people saying she was a lot of fun and just a kind person. Brianna.
All right, Bryn, thank you for that report. Bryn Gingras reporting from New York. And for anyone suffering out there who may need help, we just want to remind you the number for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. They provide free and confidential support for anyone in emotional distress, and that is a line that is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Explosions are intensifying at Guatemala's Fuego volcano. 75 people have passed away. Emergency crews are still searching for nearly 200 people who are missing since this volcano erupted on Sunday. And starting today, some of the injured will be transferred to Mexico and also to the U.S. to be treated for severe burns. Officials are saying the conditions there are now extremely critical. It wasn't my finest hour. Former President Bill Clinton's apology tour, day 2, after his comments on Monica Lewinsky.
They had to, distill it. And it looked like I was saying I didn't apologize and I had no intention to. And I was mad at me. Nonetheless, I realized, hey, there are a lot of people that don't have any memory of that. And all they saw was me mad, and I seemed to be tone deaf, to put it mildly. People need to know. I apologize. I meant it then. I mean it now. I've lived with the consequences, and I still support Me Too. And I think we all need to keep trying to be doing better.
Former President Bill Clinton continuing his apology tour, this in the wake of those pretty tone-deaf comments that he made about Monica Lewinsky during an NBC interview.
So joining us now, Errol Louis, CNN political commentator, and Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Thank you guys for being here. Caitlin, let me begin with you. a lot has been written about and debated whether or not the president is a liability for Democrats running in the midterms. I just wonder where you think, big picture, Bill Clinton stands now in U.S. politics, given how much everything around him in society has changed and being in the midst of the Me Too movement.
Absolutely. I was thinking back to just late last year when Democrats pushed out Al Franken from the Senate because they didn't want to have that liability of sexual harassment and assault in their midst. They wanted to claim the moral high ground on this issue. Bill Clinton reemerging into the scene really, I think, plays to what the heart of Me Too is, which is that all of this behavior that had gone on for so long, the country has now faced a reckoning on how we face this issue. And if the former president was aiming to be in cleanup mode in that interview, he did really the opposite of that. He had a long runway, really, to come up with something that was at least a little bit more thoughtful, especially against the backdrop of Monica Lewinsky herself having her own reflections about this whole entire saga that really changed the course of her life, even acknowledging that she suffered from PTSD because of this. So when you're looking at the bigger picture, I can't imagine many Democratic candidates are going to want the support of Bill Clinton because it is going to bring that up when they're trying to change the course of the conversation.
Yeah, it's hard to see, Errol, where he is a benefit at this point in time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, look, he can be deployed strategically in specific places, in which case he could do a great deal of good, depending on the district that you're talking about. But let's keep in mind, this was Bill Clinton helping Bill Clinton. The reason he was on television was not to advance the Me Too movement, but to help sell his next book. And so if he wants to be part of a national conversation and put himself out there in a sort of a Hollywood context, then all of the wrong associations with the Bill Clinton era come back, as opposed to going to, you know, for example, a tour of some of the forgotten places in the economy that were helped during the Clinton years.
Yeah.
Maybe go there and help some Democratic candidates, not sit on national television talking with comedians about why what you did was okay 20 years ago.
Remember, he's on this book tour. He's doing this to sell the book that he wrote with James Patterson. Let me get you both on something that is striking, and that is how the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, chose to answer a question in her congressional testimony yesterday when asked about, Errol, the role of guns in schools. Here's the notable exchange.
Will your commission look at the role of firearms as it relates to gun violence in our schools?
That is not part of the commission's charge, per se.
I see. So you're studying gun violence but not considering the role of guns.
We're actually studying school safety and how we can ensure our students are safe at school.
Guns, Errol, are not part of the charge of the Federal School Safety Commission.
Well, you know, except when they are, because we've heard Secretary DeVos on the record talk about the possibility of teachers being armed in the classroom. So
great point.
She's right in the middle of a very convoluted position that this administration is trying to walk, in which they are in slavish obedience to the NRA line that there should be more guns for everybody at all times. And at the same time, she's clearly dealing with a public that is fed up with the prospect of our children being exposed to this kind of violence. And so what you get is the kind of incoherence that you just heard.
And Caitlin, I mean, that's the thing. We know watching the 60 Minutes interview, she's not very good sometimes at answering questions. I mean, it's really bad, right? And that's what we saw there. But the concern, of course, is that sort of being very bad at answering that question, how does that affect how the commission is actually going to look at what is a very pressing issue for people, Democrats and Republicans?
Right. I mean, the headline coming out from that answer, just that answer, that exchange that you played, is really startling, to say that guns will not be considered in a topic about school shootings that involve guns. This administration, remember, the president tried to kind of paint himself as someone willing to talk about gun control measures, only to walk it back very soon after. And he gave a speech to the NRA not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, really touting the Second Amendment, talking about his administration being the top proponent of the Second Amendment and kind of denigrating Democrats for that. So the administration, this is reflective of the administration's position on this issue.
So, guys, Kelly Sadler, the White House aide who made that crude joke, well, she says it was a joke, about John McCain dying and why does his opinion matter in any of this anyways, didn't get fired because she said it. It's been a month since then. Didn't issue a public apology that was promised to his daughter, Meghan McCain. Now she's out of the White House, Errol, but she's not, according to Kellyanne Conway, disqualified from other positions in the administration. John Berman pressed her on that just this morning. And it seems like, according to the reporting, apparently she's out of the White House because she got in a fight with Mercedes Schlapp and pointed at her in the Oval Office and said she's a leaker. What does this tell us about what matters most to the administration?
Well, it tells you a couple of things. One is that there seems to be some real chaos as far as the management of the staff, and these stories have continued really from day one of this administration. You compare it to the prior administration, you never heard about these kind of antics and animosity leaking out all of the time. It seems to be an almost daily occurrence. The other thing it tells you, though, is that they may be trying to find their way to some kind of rational compromise where, you know, clearly this person doesn't belong in the White House. Clearly this person shouldn't be in high-level discussions where the kind of cruelty that she displayed would be deployed in decision-making. On the other hand, people have to make a living, and if she wants to be a public servant, there's got to be somewhere in the federal government where she might be able to help the public. And so perhaps they will find their way to some rational place, get her out of that building and into a place where she can actually serve the public.
All right, Errol Louis, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much. Bree.
A contractor at the White House who is accused of attempted murder was arrested when he showed up for work. CNN's Joe Johns here now with this. Tell us about who is this guy? What does he do at the White House, and how did the Secret Service get involved here?
Low-level administrative worker at the old executive office building, which is the building adjacent to the White House. Now, Brianna, as you know, this is an ongoing problem for Secret Service and others who vet the staffers who work at secure facilities, especially the White House. It does raise some questions about awareness of people who've had serious run-ins with the law, and when the Secret Service became aware of the problem. The contractor's name is Martise Edwards. As I said, a low-level administrative type at the old EOB. Police say his arrest stems from a shooting on May 3rd in Suitland, Maryland. Detectives said the shooting was domestic in nature. There was a male victim, we're told, from Prince George's County Police in Maryland who was shot. That victim transported with life-threatening injuries. Edwards faces attempted first-degree murder and assault charges. Now, it's the timeline, Brianna, that is concerning. This individual certainly had the event that occurred on May 3rd, arrest warrant the middle of the month around the 17th.
Sure, okay.
And then the individual finally is taken into custody on Tuesday. Some questions there for the Secret Service that we are reaching out.
So the event May 3rd, but the arrest warrant the 17th. So that's, I mean, that's
Right.
over 2 weeks.
Exactly. So
Since this guy should have been on the radar, right?
Precisely right. So when you have contact with authorities, and the case is an allegation of attempted murder, that's quite serious.
Yeah, EEOB, right across the street from the West Wing, we should say. Joe Johns, thank you so much for that. Now, Facebook is under fire again for sharing users' private data, this time to a Chinese company that's been called a U.S. security threat.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
All right, welcome back. Right now, the president is gearing up for what looks like a contentious meeting with key allies after hitting them with new tariffs on aluminum and steel. Here at home, though, a possible success story for U.S. Steel announcing its plan to hire 300 more workers, citing more demand for U.S. steel, partly because of the tariffs from the president. Our chief business correspondent Christine Romans has more.
Poppy, steelworkers celebrating there in Granite City, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis. You know, this entire facility idled back in 2015, but the president's steel tariff announcement back in March led U.S. Steel to restart a blast furnace and hire back 500 steelworkers. The demand for American-made steel means U.S. Steel will restart now another blast furnace by October 1st, hiring, the company says, another 300 workers. U.S. Steel President and CEO David Burritt, in a statement after careful consideration of market market conditions and customer demand, including the impact of Section 232. The restart of the 2 blast furnaces at Granite City Works will allow us to serve our customers' growing demand for high-quality products melted and poured in the United States. It is exactly, Poppy, the type of win the president wants in the face of anger among allies. Mexico just announced retaliatory tariffs on $3 billion worth of U.S. goods like steel, pork, cheese, and bourbon. And there's also concern from business executives. The Powerful Business Roundtable is worried about Trump's overall trade strategy, and that uncertainty means they are scaling back plans for hiring and spending. It says 89% of America's top CEOs worry that trade policy will slow the economy. 90% think it will lead to higher business costs. But Poppy, looking at a win like at Granite City, that's really important for the optics of this president, even as many other allies and business leaders are concerned about the president's trade policies overall. Poppy?
All right, Christy Romans, thank you so much for that. Buckle up for this breaking news, folks, because we've just learned that Mexico is slapping $3 billion in tariffs on U.S. goods. This is in retaliation to what President Trump did to Mexico just days ago, our U.S. ally. Here's an important reminder. Mexico is the second largest market for U.S. exports, meaning they are the second biggest consumer of goods we make here in this country with American jobs. They buy $345 billion worth of U.S. goods and services every year, according to the Commerce Department, Brianna. So you know what? This is what a trade war looks like.
Yeah, and that's the big question. You know, is this the kickoff to it? It sure is looking like it, Poppy, and we'll be exploring that throughout the hour. Also this morning, if Facebook is not getting the headlines that it wants, the social media giant is taking heat for data sharing partnerships that it has with the Chinese tech giant. Why? Well, because U.S. intelligence officials have called that Chinese company, Huawei is the name of it, a security threat to the U.S. Republican Senator Marco Rubio tweeted this overnight. He said this could be a very big problem. If Facebook granted Huawei special access to social data of Americans, this might as well have given it directly to the government of China. Joining me now, we have CNN Money Tech correspondent Sam Burke. And Sam, Facebook is saying there's no issue here, there's no problem, but they're ending the program, which speaks volumes. What do you make of this?
Absolutely. People waking up once again this morning and asking, where is my Facebook data? And the explanation that Facebook is giving for this is quite interesting. They say basically this is from a bygone era before there were app stores. So the phone makers like Apple, like Huawei, had to make the apps themselves. But take a look at this list, Brianna, of the details that they were handing over to some of these companies about us, starting with your education and work information, also your relationship status, work, religion, political leanings. And it begs the question, if I invite you to lunch, Brianna, I might need your phone number, but why would I ask you for your social security number, all this type of information? Same question here. If you're designing apps and you want to give people a good experience, why does Apple or Huawei, that the U.S. intelligence agencies have said for many years, long before the Trump administration, is a security threat, why would they need all of that information about us? Now, let me just put up on the screen what Facebook is saying in response to all of this. They're kind of shrugging it off. A vice president saying, quote, Facebook, along with many other U.S. tech companies, have worked with Huawei and other Chinese manufacturers to integrate their service onto these phones. We're not aware of any abuse, they say, but the fact that there could have been abuse means that Facebook had our data in a vulnerable position.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Samuel Burke, thank you so much for that report. Now, Democrats appear to avert disaster in one of the most consequential primaries of the season. So what does this mean for the possible blue wave as we are hurtling now toward the midterms? We're going to...
Hello, good morning. The big question is who is number 2 in California under this jungle primary, as they call it. So Gavin Newsom, the Republicans were worried that they were not going to have any candidates at the top of the ticket to cross the state and that they wouldn't have as many voters come November. But Gavin Newsom, the Democrat, former mayor of San Francisco, will face a Republican for governor. That is very good news for Republicans out here in California. They may also have a Republican in the Senate race.